Known as the philosopher's historian, Diogenes Laertius preserved much of the wisdom and ideas of ancient Western civilization. Combining historical facts with comical anecdotes, avoiding speculation or projecting his own opinions and theories, without his book, truly little would have survived the Dark Ages. Diogenes Laertius' second book, Hedonism. Aristippus was a citizen of Cyrene, and therefore the historian titles the school or manner of thought as the Cyrenaic. Aeschines, another student of Socrates that I will mention in the next section, says that it was Socrates' fame that first attracted Aristippus to Athens. Another man, Phanias of Eresus, a follower of Aristotle, says that Aristippus was the first of Socrates' students to charge a fee. The latter should hint at what kind of thoughts this man adhered to. Either way, it is clear that the founder of hedonism was a student of Socrates. Apparently, the man was really good at adapting to circumstances or playing roles as necessary, thus he found favor at the court of Dionysius, the tyrant of Syracuse. Consider this behavior.
And when Dionysius gave him his choice of 3 courtesans, he carried off all 3, saying,
Pyrrhus paid dearly for giving the preference to 1 out of 3.
And when he had brought them as far as the porch, he let them go. To such lengths did he go both in choosing and in disdaining. Hence the remark of Strato, or by some accounts of Plato,
You alone are endowed with the gift to flaunt in robes or go in rags.
I found that most commendable. There are more examples, but consider how Alcibiades, another student of Socrates, was also famous for his ability to pretend or fit the circumstances. Subsequently, Diogenes describes or quotes many jocular, entertaining, thought-provoking interchanges this man had with various people. The first example concerns a dispute with Diogenes the Cynic, the dog lover, but instead consider the following.
When Dionysius inquired what was the reason that philosophers go to rich men's houses, while rich men no longer visit philosophers, his reply was that
The one know what they need while the other do not.
There are many such passages. So many that I cannot quote them all. I will take many for aphorism sculpting. Do consider this one, that I suspect does not contain a presently applicable aphoristic boulder.
when someone brought his son as a pupil, he asked a fee of 500 drachmae. The father objected.
For that sum I can buy a slave.
Then do so,
Was the reply.
and you will have 2.
Further on, the discussion veers on the sexual. It begins with Diogenes mentioning the following exchange.
Being asked on one occasion what is the difference between the wise man and the unwise,
Strip them both,
said he.
and send them among strangers, and you will know.
I do not know if that means that there is no difference or in fact clothing hides the true difference. It is debatable, although surely the wise would comport differently in either not being ashamed or not being prideful. Truly, I will see if an aphorism or 2 may be gathered from this notion. Subsequently, the historian explains that Aristippus had as a partner a famed courtesan, a prostitute. He would argue that the number of past partners, made no difference to him. Surely, this is most commendable. Another noteworthy thing that Diogenes attributes Aristippus is spitting on a man's face and explaining.
I could not find any place more suitable.
I have heard this deed being attributed to Diogenes the Cynic. There was one most uncommendable thing. He was accused of not taking responsibility for a child of his. He argued that there was no way to confirm that that was his child, as it was a courtesan's child. Regardless, the whole thing isn't nice. This man wrote 25 dialogues and many treatises that did not survive the Dark Ages. Different people attribute different titles or names to the philosophy of hedonism. Regardless, since the present historian says that Aristippus' daughter was Arete, and she called it hedonism, then I will follow suit. These thinkers considered that humans could undergo only 2 states, either pleasure or pain. Of pleasure that all are the same, and that none are different. As such, bodily pleasure is the end, the purpose, the motivator of existence and all human action. Diogenes clarifies, they differ from the later Epicureans in that they did not consider the absence of pain or discomfort as the essence of happiness. Rather, the actual presence of pleasure is necessary for happiness. Let me quote.
Our end is particular pleasure, whereas happiness is the sum total of all particular pleasures, in which are included both past and future pleasures. Particular pleasure is desirable for its own sake, whereas happiness is desirable not for its own sake, but for the sake of particular pleasures.
Truly, this is an asseveration that raises the eyebrows, LOL. As for how people sometimes do not choose pleasure, they think it results from mental disorder or perversion, akin to folly. Yet admitting this possibility does allow the hedonists to recognize that not all pleasures and pains result from the expectation of physical pleasure or pain. Rather, they thought psychological pleasure is possible even if there is no expectation or memory of physical pleasure. Apparently, this is a disagreement with the Epicureans. To the latter, no pleasure can exist without the psychological component. Diogenes will cover Epicurus in his last book. Where the hedonists definitively disagree with at least the modern-day utilitarians is that
bodily pleasures are far better than mental pleasures, and bodily pains far worse than mental pains, and that this is the reason why offenders are punished with the former.
To me, it seems obvious that offenders are not punished, or cannot be punished, for mental transgressions because these are impossible to confirm and measure. Nonetheless, the Cyrenaic thought the bodily to be the most important. Interjecting my own opinion, I think the not-so-hairy monkeys are defined by vanity in the broadest sense of the word. They have a nearly inescapable obsession with opining highly or positively of their own selves. This need to hold a positive opinion about themselves shapes all of their other opinions and drives their decisions. In fact, when they have a tough time holding a positive opinion of themselves, then, alas, they are liable to commit suicide. Returning to Diogenes' biographies, he says that the hedonists do not believe virtues exist. If they agree that virtues are good, it is only as a result of their utility, their capacity to yield happiness and pleasure, or to motivate restraint from the reverse. For example,
They say that prudence is a good, though desirable not in itself, but on account of its consequences.
at least they do admit that the sage is capable of avoiding vices, but not that he or she is capable of avoiding pain and fear. A certain Hegesias, who provides a modification to this manner of thought, says that happiness is impossible because
the body is infected with much suffering, while the soul shares in the sufferings of the body and is a prey to disturbance, and fortune often disappoints.
I must say, this is a rather Buddhist observation. This same man is attributed for introducing the relativity, the subjectivity, of the causes of pleasure and happiness. As such, all men and women are equal as it regards the possibility of attaining pleasure and happiness. Neither wealth, nor status, nor anything sets a person to have a better possibility of happiness. That is some serious wisdom. If you enjoy that notion, perhaps you will continue to enjoy the conclusion that Hegesias reaches from it.
To the fool life is advantageous, while to the wise it is a matter of indifference. The wise man will be guided in all he does by his own interests, for there is none other whom he regards as equally deserving.
Yes, this version of hedonism, the Hegesian, is unabashedly selfish. Selfishness concluded from the relative and subjective nature of existence. In fact, all take an essentially selfish view to happiness and humanity. That is not to say that one should be vindictive. Yes, despite such an attitude towards the value of life, with the life of others being beneath personal happiness, he argued that one should not hold odium towards others. The reasoning being that all are essentially slaves to pleasure and pain, thus all must be sympathized with. So, have sympathy for others because they, like yourself, are slaves to pleasure and pain. Yet, according to Hegesias, this means your own happiness is more important because it is your own, LOL. A certain Anniceris agreed with all the prior, but differed in that friendship and gratitude, especially to parents, could and did truly exist in humanity. As such, the love for a friend or family member is held to be a pleasure that may equal or justify bodily pain. Unfortunately, Diogenes does not explain more about this. Lastly, there is a Theodorus and his followers. They agreed with all the prior, but were also most adamant about not believing in divinity. Yes, they were atheists. Apparently, Epicurus borrowed most of his opinions on the subject from him. Furthermore, he disagreed with Anniceris concerning friendship.
Friendship he rejected because it did not exist between the unwise nor between the wise. With the former, when the want is removed, the friendship disappears, whereas the wise are self-sufficient and have no need of friends.
As in Plato's Lysis, I wonder about the half-wise and half-fools, lol. Also, he argued that it was appropriate not to sacrifice oneself for any country or city, as that would be but the wasting of intellect for the benefit of the foolish. Hard to disagree with that one. I found most thought-provoking that Theodorus argued that good and evil result from using or not using things in the manner in which they are useful. Apparently, he notes as an example the case of a beautiful woman in the sense that she is useful for sex. Of course, I would argue most, if not all, usefulness is relative. Surely the woman might not consider herself useful for such a thing. Again, the whole ignores the possibility of an objective viewpoint and measure, which is most aligned with atheism. In fact, Theodorus agreed to the title of God when Stilpo, who will be mentioned later, asked him,
"Are you, Theodorus, what you declare yourself to be?"
To this he assented, and Stilpo continued.
"And do you say you are God?"
To this he agreed.
"Then it follows that you are God."
Of course, such is the conclusion of absolute, infinite subjectivity. I should mention that I have always assumed that Protagoras' subjectivity, who lived before the current philosophers and held that man is the measure of all things, was claiming as a sociological phenomenon. I do not think he argued in favor of absolute subjectivity, but rather as if an objectivity that results from separate subjectivities. A contextual or conditional objectivity. Diogenes will cover Protagoras in his 9th book, about metaphysics. Returning to the text, Theodorus was brought to trial in Athens for impiety. Apparently, although Diogenes does not elaborate, Demetrius of Phalerum saved him from having to drink the hemlock. By the way, Demetrius was the governor of Athens under Macedonian rule. The historian ends this section enumerating 20 noteworthy people by the name Theodorus. These include architects, politicians, military generals, artists, poets, and philosophers. One of them figured out how to keep building foundations dry, thus allowing for the constructions of multi-story buildings.
May the scientists that labor for the rich be like doctors that labor for the ill.
If a teacher is sought, he surely does not teach, he merely pleases.
As ignorance forbids the reverse, it is the teacher that must seek students.
Those who in study stop short of philosophy are like the suitors of Penelope that seduced the handmaidens but failed to gain the queen.